then it doesn't raise any red flags. But it's got highly beneficial microbes in it, and it wouldn't be a matter of spreading pathogens. Nonetheless, you would take cow manure, probably fresh cow manure, and you might take some siliceous rock powder, and you're doing this according to a recipe, but you're mixing that in, maybe some eggshell calcium. I happen to advocate coral calcium. It's got a different gesture, so it works upward into the plant more readily, I believe. It's more closely allied with silica, and it's a biological calcium. But so is eggshell. Anyway, you would use these things in mixing with the cow manure. I would always add a little clay. But your rock powder, basalt maybe, or granite rock powder, might have the precursors of clay in it. And it would be like adding a young clay. But you do need a little of that clay component, is my belief. And you take this and mix it in a mixing process. It's like homeopathic potentization. So you work this manure pile for up to an hour. I have seen people do this in a cement mixer. And I've seen people do this with shovels. I used to do it with a shovel myself. And the purists would never use a cement mixer. But they might not get much done either. So if you had this on a large scale, you might get one of these cement trucks and do it in a cement truck. But you would mix this up very thoroughly, and then you would put it into classically a barrel, but actually a shallow pit works better, because if you get this, it's very digestive. You put this in a wooden barrel, and you'll be using up barrels. You'll know that it's working really well when you digest a barrel per year. So you might want to get some sort of bricks and build pits, and I had some pictures of that in the slides. So we might all look at that. Somewhere here. That's it, right there. This is, and I want to emphasize that these herbal preparations are all about nitrogen. Nitrogen is getting drawn into, nitrogen is the vehicle for the astrality. It's the vehicle for consciousness and intelligence. Our nitrogen chemistry is what provides memory in terms of the DNA in the cell. Our nitrogen chemistry is what provides memory in the DNA of the cell. And nitrogen is the basis of what we hold up here in our cranium, our quantum computer. And it has that property of quantum entanglement. If you want to develop your farm organism, you especially need to pay attention to nitrogen as coming into and cycling through your farm, through the organic life of your farm. That means you're going to get all your nitrogen out of the atmosphere. You're going to stop importing nitrogenous materials as fertilizers. Because what happens then is you get the unique DNA signature, you might say, of your farm built into your farm, and that's going to be composed of all the different microbial life in the soil and in the plants and so forth in your farm, in your animals' guts. And what that develops, especially if you're into growing wine, you develop terroir. And it comes from the soil. Your nitrogen comes into this process through the soil, And these herbal preparations are especially important for getting nitrogen fixation and digestion and nutrient uptake happening. And that's what you put into as biodynamic preparations into the making of your barrel compost. Or in the case that you see here, this was in India actually, this picture, and it's called cowpat pit. So it's cowpat pit is called CPP, cowpat pit, and it's a compost, the same formula basically as your barrel compound, and it's done in a shallow pit. You cover it with say burlap or hessian bag, and you keep it moist, but it keeps the roots of the trees and plants around it out. Boy, do they go for it. And and it keeps you from having to replace barrels every year. So, but you take that process, you put that material in your pit, and then you would put these various preparations in, just a small amount, put it into there and let them work. And there's a dynamic of how they work, and there's several of us have been experimenting a long time with this. Oh, yeah, you'll have to get up and follow this guy. Okay?
Good morning.
I hope I answered your question. Anyway.
Do you have experience around coconut palms, Southeast Asia, using biodynamic techniques? Coconut palms?
What kind of palms?
Coconut.
Oh, coconut palms. No, there's people with biodynamic farms in far northern Queensland that are using biodynamics, and it's there again. You get a coconut from a coconut tree that is getting all its nitrogen as amino acid nitrogen, and it's getting the optimum, like sunshine and the flavor, the potassium and everything that's involved. And boy, you've got a coconut that just, it's going to boggle your mind.
Now, in certain parts of Southeast Asia, they'll use sea salt as their fertilization. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, and there's a number of things that we don't know about sea salt, but we do know it contains every mineral in the ocean, which is virtually every mineral in the periodic table. And there's a lot of them that we have long had insufficient research on, but boy, does it add flavor to things. And it really does boost this nitrogen fixation thing that happens. And we think that orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements is part of that picture. And this is something that I don't think I can do justice to in just a few paragraphs.
You put it as a liquid.
Yeah, you would put it. Yeah, you would put it. Yeah, the thing about it is you, depending on your soils and conditions, a small amount goes a long way. But you want to put it in a place like Theodore, where you saw the corn grown, and the sodium and the chlorine will build up in that soil, and it's not a sustainable practice. But you do it maybe on seashore, and you don't have that problem. The sodium and the chloride don't build up. So you want to be careful about putting seawater out in dry areas, because the sodium and the chloride build up there. And so it's not advisable. You want to have the salt actually taken out of that by evaporation and removal of the sea salt, and take the pot liquor that stays behind and use that as your agricultural input. But it's very good, and I've often used it along with biodynamic preparations, and you get great results.
Thank you.
Okay?
I have a question. You mentioned something about permaculture, and I come from that world too. Jan Bang is the permaculture secretary for Norway, and he's done a lot of work with Camp Hill programs and biodynamics, and he wanted to have a lot more people really start to use permaculture and biodynamics together, to start to do trials and to see how those two things work. And you mentioned the edge phenomenon, and I just wanted to know if in Australia, if you've found anyone that are doing those kind of trials, and the difference between a cultivation, that occurs in biodynamic agriculture versus a no-till method that occurs in permaculture, and just cosmically, like how you see those two things maybe working together.
Okay. I love this question. David Holmgren, who's one of the originators of permaculture, uses biodynamic preparations in his own gardens and things, and likewise advocates that more people should be using biodynamics with permaculture. Now, in the biodynamic community, there are the sort of orthodox people that don't want to dilute their biodynamics or do too much experimentation even, and they have got the only right way. But, and that exists in the permaculture community too, so that you've got people that want to stick to a sort of an orthodox permaculture, which is certainly not Bill Mollison's style, but nonetheless that creeps in. So there is an orthodoxy that says, oh, you never cultivate or anything like that. I have found using biodynamics with no-till, like no-till pasture planting, it's the way to do your pasture planting. And if you were to pasture plant cereal grains and winter legumes right into your pastures, you would maximize carbon capture and the buildup of life forces in your soil, because you would have a plant that really knows how to grow in those seasons, and it's an annual, and you may or may not harvest the grain off of it, but if you're pasturing cattle, you've got something that really builds up sugar in the winter, and there's just no annual or summer grasses that do that sort of thing in pastures, annual or perennial. And your cereal grains they really have that ecological niche. And with a disc opener, there is, yes, arguably a little bit of cultivation, but it's just inserting the seed, maybe with a nutrient solution on top of it, to get it to really get on a really fast start. But it really does work better than cultivation. It may reduce in the initial stages. What you really want to do is reduce compaction. And there's people in Australia that with big rigs that are planting no-till and following the GPS so they never travel anywhere but the same tracks, always. And that means that the microbial life in the soil will then open up the soil, and they will do the cultivation far better than we can do it with any kind of machinery that we've got. And you will see in those places where this is going, this happened in my farm in Georgia, that even on the roadside, where it wasn't driven on, it got to where look, I used to put out movable electric fences, and I used to have trouble getting them in the ground. And then it got softer and softer, and it got to where it was easy to get them in the ground. And I'd step on it, and it would sink down where I never, ever tilled it. It would sink down because of the natural development of that cultivation process. And so you do want to encourage that.